listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are live from the United States and just outside the Matrix. It is time for the show that brings you the truth behind the headlines. And today it's especially behind the headlines. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory. Now, let me say this, and I'm going to be very specific about what I mean here. This is not a general statement, although it could be. Damn that Joe Biden. And here's why I say that. I'm a little confused about what the show is, Rod. So let's go over it. I think I'm going to tell you what the show is. Tell me if I'm wrong, okay? So in the first hour, we have our friend Carmine Sabia joining us. How does that sound so far, Rod?
That's correct.
Okay, then next hour, we've got special Tuesday co-host Jason Goodman, as we often do. And we are joined by somebody who does a show with Jason, who I've talked to before, but I think it's the first time he's been on our show, the great Charles Ortel. How does that sound? Is that all right so far?
That's correct as well.
Okay, and then there's you and me and Saul, as usual, and that's it. That's the show, right?
That's right.
Okay, phew. There's a little, you see what I'm saying? Here's why. Because Joe Biden just did a press conference. It started about a half hour ago. And as these Joe Biden press conferences go, we have no idea how long it was going to go. It could have butted into our show. It's possible. And it did end early, and he didn't take any questions, right? He just blew doors, as we used to say, back in the 80s. Does that make sense? Rod, he just took off. He ended the press conference and he left. Didn't take any questions, correct? Did I miss anything?
No questions.
Right. So, he's gone. And then our show started on time. But, hey, Carmine, you there? And I don't hear
here yet.
But wait, tell me what. So, Saul, tell me when we got Carmine on, okay?
Okay, one sec.
Then I will throw it to him, as we say in the professional broadcasting business, which I swear to God I am. So there's our show today, and of course we're taking your calls. 202-521-1320 is the number if you want to be part of the show. It's The Backstory. I'll say this, Rod, in a whiny way. I'm not overly thrilled with the cameras right now. It's one step up and two steps back. I got a shot going that I was having trouble. See, I'm doing it right now. Anybody watching a video, notice that this video of me on a 3D object on the 3D set. I realized this, Rod. Think about this. We were the first show, and damn it, I'm going to take credit for it the same way I deserve credit for doing the first interview on Twitter with a politician. Because you know I did that, right, Rod?
Yeah, I heard you talk about that before.
Yes. Now, George Stephanopoulos took credit. So here's what I'm going to take credit for right now. We are the first show that had a radio broadcast in the metaverse. Right? Think about it. Does that make sense, Rod? You've heard about the metaverse, right?
Yeah, I heard that. I haven't visited yet, but yeah, no, you're right. You got a 3D set. You had 3D characters. You had Shane. You had Jamal. I think that's it. I can't remember if you had anybody else yet.
No, I could do. You know what? I have a 3D model of me, by the way, and I could do it. I have the technology where you could be watching a 3D version of me that would sync lips with me talking, because I can do that technically.
Is this the version with you with the long hair that we've seen in the picture before, or is it current hair?
It could be. It could be anything. I could have this voice coming out of any person I want, because that's the thing about the metaverse. You can be anything you want to physically. Now, we're pleased to be joined by somebody who would absolutely be himself because he does love the way he looks. Our friend Carmine Sabia is joining us, right, Carmine?
I am a pretty man.
There we go. See? You see what I'm saying, Rod? He's one of those guys, he's watched a lot of wrestling. Carmine, you're one of those guys who would flex your muscle and kiss it. Be honest. Have you ever done that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've ever done that when I had muscles, yes.
There we go. Now, because now I'm not saying you're old. God knows I'm older.
I'm old.
Dude, you're not old. Is the first number in your age a 5?
No.
Okay, what is it? It's a 3, probably, right?
No, I'll give my age. I'm 44.
44, but if you'd said you were 39, I would have bought it. Hook, line, and sinker. And
Well,
I think
thank you.
also, no. And, but 44, that's great. But 44 is still, it's approaching middle age, but you're not there yet, my friend. Trust me.
You don't think so? See, I think I'm middle-aged.
No, I know I'm middle-aged. You know how I know? Because I get a discount at Kentucky Fried Chicken. If I tell them
Well,
my
I'll take
age,
the discount.
well, and do you know what happens to Kentucky Fried Chicken if I tell them my age? They never ask
you
for
chicken
ID,
or-
those bastards. No, they never. They believe me. They go, yeah, sure. Now, speaking of fast food, Jack
And old
Posobiec,
men.
a guy I don't like, but he posted something very interesting the other day. He was apparently at the Subway sandwiches. You've heard of them. Did you
I used
see?
to work there when I was 17.
Okay, it's a good place, by the way. Shane Stranahan, former co-host of Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan when he was on it. Now it's Thomas and Pelly. Used to work at Subway as well.
Well, you see,
But-
smart people.
Did you see that right now, a large roast beef sandwich at Subway in D.C. apparently is $20, $19.57 or so. Right.
Holy smoke!
Would you feel immoral paying $20 for a large Subway sandwich at Subway?
A porterhouse with a baked potato for $20.
Right. It's crazy. And that's the way it was. The meatball sandwich, my personal favorite at Subway, that was like a large one, a 12-inch, was like $14 or $15.
When? Now?
Yeah. Well, I assume so. I assume Jack Posobiec didn't make that up. He's made up stuff in the past. But I assume that
I'm
it would have
gonna
been
be
too much work.
I said boo because I'm Italian and I don't believe in like fast food meatballs, but I got to be honest. The Subway meatballs are pretty good though. They're pretty tight.
They are pretty good. I don't confuse them with real Italian meatballs. Does that make sense? Like
Just Italian.
I know
It's
there's a
Italian.
difference. Well, I'm here in the Midwest, and sometimes it's Italian. I tell you, the reason I say that is I was at a grocery store once in Topeka, Kansas, where I used to live. And
What's the matter with your mouth?
Me? What do you mean?
Or something wrong with your voice today. It's different.
I don't think so. Saul, how do I sound?
You sound the same.
Saul
doesn't
thinks I
sound
sound the
deeper?
same.
I think you sound deeper. I think you're like, hey, baby. But
anyway,
He just
Barry
turned
White there?
16.
Well, no, but you know what it could be, Saul? It could be sometimes the service that we use, whose name I will not mention, the electronic phone service we use, sometimes it's a weird distortion where it slows the pitch down. Have you ever heard that, Saul?
that's what it sounds like. Yes, it sounds like when you do that thing with the computer and you slow the person's voice down just a touch.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on there, but Saul probably does. Something about packets, I think. But Saul, you know what he's talking about, right? That sometimes that happens, but you're not hearing it on your end. So
No,
I
I'm
want
not
to
hearing
get
that
to
on my end. It might be on
Okay,
Carmine's end.
So I think we're safe. I adjusted
Okay.
the camera. I made it too dark. I adjusted the camera, and now I'm looking at it. It's too dark. I was trying to balance the two cameras I've got going, and it's a hopeless job. But 202-521-1320. Let's go to Ingrid, and then we'll talk about this Biden speech. You and I, Carmine. Ingrid in D.C.
Sure.
Ingrid, what is on your mind?
Well, hey, have you seen the interview that Tulsi Gabbard did on Fox, I guess, last night, where she called for Jake Sullivan to resign in disgrace because of his role in the Russiagate setup?
I saw that she was on Fox and talking about that, but I did not watch the clip. Did you watch that, Carmine?
Did not know.
But she's 100% right. The fact that Jake Sullivan, who clearly, again, let's go over this. The thing that Durham dropped on Friday, Carmine, you know this, but confirm that I'm correct on this, not only showed that they were spying on the Trump campaign, as Trump suspected all along, but that they were actually spying on Trump in the White House. Right?
Yep. Spying on a presidency. By the way, I want you to know, Lee, CNN did report on it today, finally.
And what did they say? A fact check?
Took them 2 days to come up with an excuse. They'd say, well, they said basically, they said, well, it's just a filing. It's not evidence of anything yet. They didn't prove anything yet. And, they didn't actually say that there was spying. So, bro, it took them 2 days to find a way to sanitize what Durham said. This is a network that if Putin's got tapes of Donald Trump peeing on hookers, it must be true. Let's have all these experts on to talk about it. That was fine. Crazy rumors were fine when they were against Donald Trump. But an actual court filing by a respected special counsel means nothing.
Carmine, let me show you. I'm trying for a job at Snopes, so I'm going to fact check you. In fact,
please,
there were no claims that Trump peed on hookers. There were claims that hookers peed on Trump.
I'm sorry, you are correct. I apologize. I got my pee mixed up.
So I rate that as mostly false. You follow me? That's how, Snopes should hire me, because your statement was mostly false since you had the order of the urine wrong. Does that make sense?
Bro, did you see what they rated mostly false last week?
Was it about the crack pipes?
Yes. Yeah,
well,
I went nuts on them.
Let's talk about that. But first, let's just finish up on this Durham thing, then we'll get to the Biden speech. Because I called Carmine earlier, and I wanted him to come on, because it's great to do post-Biden speech analysis with Carmine. And Carmine was nice enough, even though technically it's his day off, and he's a big, fancy writer who Dinesh D'Souza. Did you see that, by the way, that Dinesh gave you a little bump there? You saw that, right?
Yes, actually, it was. I checked today, and it was right next to down. You want to talk big fancy? Right next to Donald Trump Jr. liking a couple of my tweets. So
there we go. There we go. So
I was like, I flexed my muscles. I was like, yeah.
Right, give him a kiss. Now, so here's the problem CNN's got with the Durham thing. The Durham thing, he's not. If that was if Durham was a reporter who wrote for Breitbart or Daily Wire or Daily Caller or something, this would be a one-day story. Period. And it wouldn't even be a one-day story. Here's the problem that they've got. Let me explain where this is going to go. People are being indicted, and there's going to be trials, and there's going to be people walking in and out of courtrooms, right? And then eventually there'll be a verdict rendered. So in other words, when you look at this as a reporter, I can guarantee you, unless something tragic happens to any of the people involved, which of course we don't want, this is going to go to trial. And when it goes to trial, you can predict there's going to be opening statements. If CNN's trying to hang anything on the fact this is just a filing, this ain't just a filing. This is a detailed legal filing in an ongoing indictment of somebody.
Correct.
Right? And so what I'm trying to get at here, Carmine, is that the story ain't going anywhere. It's going to keep going and going, leading up till the point. And here's the thing, CNN. If you ignore it every day, you damn well bet Gateway Pundit and Breitbart and Daily Caller, Daily Wire, whatever, any daily thing.
And Carmine.
And Carmine, of course. And I was going to say, and independent. People like Addie Ads, who covered the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, which we got stuff about that in the headlines, too. I'll just mention briefly. But people are going to be covering this, CNN. And what everybody's noticing now is what you don't cover. Have you noticed that, Carmine? Everyone's on to CNN's game.
Yep, I said, dude, I was screaming for 2-3 days, however long it is, on Twitter. I'm tagging them in posts every day. Hey, but I'm making a mockery of them. I'm not like saying, you didn't cover this. So I tagged like all their anchors, and I said, hey, listen, benefit of the doubt. Maybe you guys haven't heard of a gentleman named John Durham, but he filed a report that I think you might be interested in.
Now let me say this, too, real briefly, since we're talking about the media for a second, is that over on MSNBC, Rachel Maddow is gone. She's on hiatus. Have you heard that, Carmine?
Yeah, which is like, it would be like if Tucker was on hiatus from Fox. It's a huge deal.
Right. And that if, rather than run reruns or something, they said, well, let's have other people fill in for Tucker. So Ali Velshi was filling in for Rachel Maddow. And
oh boy,
it did right. And he's tanking. Ratings are down by like 25%, by a lot. And so it shows that Rachel Maddow should have been replaced with another lesbian. Hear me out. I'm saying I'm going to go with Carrie Windsor, adult film actress Carrie Windsor, who I took pictures of like 25 years ago. Anyone can look her up. She's got an extraordinarily long tongue, and I'll leave it at that. But she does. Also, Carrie Windsor, who I took pictures of, she also, by the way, she's a very lovely young woman, but she was the first girl in high school to play high school football. That's one of her claims to fame. But she wasn't doing it as a transgender person. She was just kind of a tomboy, which fill in your own joke right there. But Carrie Windsor actually went in as a kicker, which, if you think about it, that makes sense, right? If women are going to play football, kicker is better than linebacker, wouldn't you say?
Less likely to get crushed, yes.
So I'm just saying, if you're going to replace Rachel Maddow, go somewhere where you're replacing it with hot girl on girl action. That's all I'm saying. As professional. That's my advice to MSNBC. But here's why.
Wait a second. Wait, no, I got to fact check you. I got to fact check you now.
Yes.
You call him Maddow hot?
I'm saying just the very idea has a certain amount of, it's just as soon as you hear that as a guy, I just go, okay, I'm interested already. And here's the thing. And let me say this. Do you think Rachel Maddow would have gotten where she's gotten were she not gay? Be serious here.
First of all, she was good looking in high school if you go look at pictures. No,
but
probably not. Probably not. But
her her being openly gay gave her some branding.
Absolutely.
Does that make sense?
But she does have a huge personality, which really also helps major.
She does, but part of it was that she's kind of soft butch, if I want to get detailed
Correct.
into.
Very correct.
Right? And was, like I say, was openly gay. And I'll put it like this, because she's not traditionally Fox good looking or Connie Chung good looking or whatever. You know, I mean, there's a thing
Connie
about
Chung.
what's that?
Connie Chung? Bro, we got to have a talk.
No, maybe not now, but when she got into the news business, because here's what I was going to say.
All right. Fair.
Right. And Barbara Walters was lovely when she started. Again,
Yes.
everyone
Yes,
gets
but she's
older,
not-
right?
That is correct. By the way, how do you
But-
feel about Yoko Ono?
I feel Yoko Ono was the coolest guy in the world. John Lennon was in love with her. So and I think she was a very interesting conceptual artist. And the piece that got him interested, do you know about the ladder piece, Carmine?
No.
So this is why John Lennon got interested. Yoko was doing a gallery exhibition, and one of the pieces was a large step ladder. And at the top of the step ladder, dangling from the ceiling, was a magnifying glass and a string. So it wasn't like a traditional painting or sculpture. It was like a conceptual modern art piece. And so what you had to do was you climbed to the top of the ladder, and then you took the magnifying glass, and there was a little tiny piece of paper like taped to the ceiling. And when you looked at it, it said the word yes. And what Lennon said is, if it had said no, he wouldn't have been interested in her. And I completely understand what he means. If you have to climb to the top of a ladder to hold up to look at something, if you get up there and it says no and it's a negative message, screw you. Does that make sense? You made someone climb a ladder for, even though it's broad negativity, for negativity. So I always liked that as a conceptual art piece. And I thought that John Lennon was completely right. He said the reason he got interested in Yoko is it said the word yes. And if it had said no, he said he wouldn't have liked it. And I get where he's coming from. So now you've learned a little something about Yoko Ono. Now,
More than I ever wanted to know.
so let me say this, Carmine. The other breaking news, and I hinted at this with the Jeff Epstein thing, is that Prince Andrew reached an out-of-court settlement with Virginia Giuffre, one of Jeffrey Epstein's victims. She was the one in the photo with Prince Andrew with his arm around her waist and Ghislaine Maxwell. You've seen that photo, of course. Famous.
Mm-hmm.
And he reached an out-of-court settlement. Now, that tells me that he's guilty. Right? Does that make sense?
I mean, that's what I would say.
Because if you're not guilty and you're a prince from the royal family, you don't reach an out-of-court settlement. You stick by your guns. You see what I'm saying, Carmine?
Yeah, but I think the evidence was not in his favor.
It was not. Now, I will say this. There's a guy named Chuck Johnson. Chuck actually brought Matt Gaetz from Florida to the State of the Union. Matt Gaetz brought Chuck Johnson. Chuck has worked with Steve Bannon. Chuck posted a fake story, and I know a lot about this story, saying that photo was Photoshopped.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And it was not Photoshopped. And I know people who worked with him on that story. And he asked somebody who he knows, who said, was this Photoshopped? And the person looked at it and said, doesn't look like it to me. And Chuck, here's what Chuck did. He said, okay, could it have been Photoshopped? And the person said, maybe, I don't know. You know what I'm saying? That's a weird question. So that he was fishing for something. But Chuck was trying to exonerate And Chuck works very closely, especially at the time, with Mike Cernovich, who lied about the Epstein story as well. So I'm saying there was a calculated move to confuse the Epstein story. But I think it's good, actually, that, it's in a sense, it's too bad because now we'll never know anything. Whenever they do these out-of-court settlements, you know this, Carmine, that's it on public comment. Everybody signs releases that they'll never say nothing, right?
Correct.
But I agree. And Prince Andrew was already kind of a black sheep in the royal family because of Koo Stark, one of the people he dated. He'd already had some trouble. And then there were photos of Prince Andrew and Epstein walking together and talking after Epstein was in trouble. So they're making this go away. But that is, you watch, that should be a big deal and should lead to other things. But I'm a little bit skeptical that it will. By the way, do you know what one of Chuck Johnson, who did this fake story, he had a site called Got News is where he published it. It's down now. But do you know who he knew since he was 16?
I'd love to know.
Alan Dershowitz,
Yo.
Epstein's attorney. Chuck is friends with Alan Dershowitz. In fact, when Matt Gaetz got in trouble for bringing Chuck, because Chuck said some stuff, if I say he said some stuff that's legit racist, I mean it. I'm not overusing the term. He said some stuff that's legit racist because Chuck said it to me too, privately.
Okay.
But he also said some stuff publicly. And when Matt Gaetz was called out, do you know who came to Chuck Johnson's defense? Alan Dershowitz. Alan said, I've known Chuck since he was 16 because Chuck is a very smart guy. Chuck's a genius, basically. But, he's that kind of genius that has no moral anything. Does that make sense? Like a sociopath kind of genius?
All about money.
And Hannibal Lecter. And I know stories about him and money as well, by the way. He also, one of the things he said about money, Rod, do you know the Chuck Johnson laptop story? Because, Rod, you know a bit about crypto.
I believe I've heard you talk about it before with Pat Ryan.
Yeah, so Chuck said that he found a laptop that had like 5 Bitcoins on it or something, whatever it was. Because Bitcoin right now, I think, is at around 48,000. So it was probably more than 5. But do many people in your experience, Rod, find laptops with Bitcoin on them?
No, it'd be kind of hard to just find Bitcoin on a laptop, and plus anybody who was dealing with Bitcoin at that time would know how to secure their wallets.
Right, and so it seems a little suspect. And by the way, this is after Matt Gaetz had got a large donation in Bitcoin. He was the first. He was a pioneer there. He was one of the first people in politics to get a donation in Bitcoin. But and no one knew where it came from. So I got some guesses there. But anybody can look up Chuck Johnson, Alan Dershowitz, Matt Gaetz. You just type that in a search engine, you'll find those stories. And Dershowitz. So do you think it's interesting, Carmine, that a guy who's close personal friends with Alan Dershowitz posted a story saying that the Virginia Giuffre photo, which is clear photographic evidence, was photoshopped as a fake picture, especially when Virginia Giuffre's also accused Alan Dershowitz. Do you find that suspect? Does your reporter's spidey sense go off there, Carmine?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm sitting here right now telling you about it a little frightened because Chuck is a threatening guy. And so if I hear, oh yeah, I've got texts where he's threatening me.
Like
and
to hurt you physically? To destroy me or whatever.
Well, let me put it to you this way, Home Slice, and I'll leave it at this without getting into too much detail. I'm an Italian guy from Jersey. Play that game with me.
Right. By the way, Chuck, if you're
Feel free to
listening,
get it.
Chuck, if you're listening, I did say you're a genius. So I got that. And Carmine put me up to this. So
Hey,
talk
wait
to
a
him. Well, okay. But talk to him anyway, Chuck. I got to
But I
buy
got
him a
your back
steak. I appreciate it, bro. Thanks. Coming up, we got more with the great Carmine Sabia. It's double shot Carmine week here on the best
Yes.
damn radio show in the world, The Backstory.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
We are back. I'm Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory. We are joined by our great co-host friend, Carmine Sabia, for a second day in a row, because Carmine was nice enough. When I found out Biden was doing the speech, and I said, who would be fun to analyze his speech? And by analyze, you know what I mean, Carmine, make fun of. Because going into the speech, you know, Carmine, did you feel confident that we would not end up talking about how profound and Churchillian the speech was? That seemed pretty obvious, right?
Yes.
And so in that regard, he did not disappoint. The speech was fairly lame, was it not?
Yes.
Now,
I wasn't expecting Churchill.
Yes. No, it's a safe bet. Now, I was getting ready tomorrow because the intelligence community, by the way, I would recommend, there's a great website, moonofalabama.org. It's a weird name, but it's a great site. Moon of Alabama has a great piece on how long this has been planned. And this is not new. They've been pushing this since 2014, that Russia was about to invade Ukraine for a while. So this is an old story. But we were told, Carmine, that tomorrow was going to be the invasion day. In fact, it got very specific. One of the British papers said it was going to be 1 a.m. the invasion is going to start. And it's going to be 200,000 troops. I'll come back to that in a second. And that it's going to be troops starting at 1 a.m. And that 1 a.m. tomorrow, depending on the time zone, our show here starts at about midnight Russian time. Okay? So that means right midway through our show, the invasion was going to be happening. And I thought I'd do a special themed episode, our special Welcome Back to the Motherland show, right? Since Russia's invading, we could send a broadcast out for all our new Russian Ukrainian friends who are now joined with Russia again. And it would be an exciting thing. It would be sort of like doing, it was like if our show was when the fireworks went off on New Year's Eve or something like that. We could pop champagne corks, that kind of thing. But let me talk about the 200,000 number. You've been hearing, how many troops are surrounding Ukraine? Have you been hearing for weeks now, Carmine? What's the number?
About 100,000, I think it was.
Right, about 100,000. Then, in the last day, I noticed they started saying 130, sometimes 150. I don't know where those extra 30 to 50,000 troops came from. They may have been hidden like Biden voters in the election. You know what I'm saying? They were hiding. Well, because here's the thing. If you look at Biden's, and in itself it doesn't prove anything, but if you looked at Biden's rallies, you could get more people into a phone booth, right? Biden's rallies.
I've had barbecues with more people.
No, and if you look at Trump rallies, it's tens of thousands of people. So just on the optics, it seemed like there was something fishy going on. Am I right on that, Carmine, or are you more skeptical than me?
You are. No, you're spot on.
And no one's ever explained that. They just ignore it and say it's a conspiracy theory. Well, people loved voting for him, but they didn't like showing up to listen to him. But correct. I want to know where, even going from 150,000 to 200,000, where did those 50,000 come from? And they're very specific. U.S. intelligence is saying 200,000 troops. So where are they coming from, Carmine? Do you have any idea?
I do not. I do not.
That's part of how anybody watching this, I'll put it like this. At this point, this has dragged on so long that anybody who just believes the administration's story, I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but you're stupid. Is that overly mean, Carmine, to tell people that?
It's a little mean. It's not incorrect.
But I don't know. It's Yakov Shapiro has pointed this out. Like sometimes I was having a conversation with him once, and he said, well, the problem with that is that it's stupid. And he just bluntly laid it out like that. I'm like, that's a good, I got to remember that line. And so I have. So I'll say this. Anybody who believes hook, line, and sinker what the Biden administration has been saying about Russia's about to invade imminently. Imminent was over about a month ago. Do you agree with me there?
Yes.
So now anything that they're saying, and they use the word could a lot. Move Alabama points this up in headlines. They like saying Putin could attack. That's a weasel word, meaning we don't know what's going on. But Biden's speech, I think the Biden administration is backing down. What say you, Carmine? What do you think?
Looks that way. But see, here's what I think. I think they knew Russia wasn't going to invade from jump, but now Biden go on a victory tour talking about, see, I stared down Putin and I'm strong and we won.
And this is what Lavrov and people over at the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs have been saying for a while. In fact, Lavrov, in that press conference we played on this show last week, said, we have troops doing... Russia's been saying for a while that these troops are doing maneuvers.
On their own soil. Can you imagine if we said, oh, there's troops near the Canadian border, there's troops near the Mexican border, U.S. troops. Well, yeah, on our soil, yes. They're not near the border like they're going in.
Now, here's an idea.
how many troops, how many bases we have near Mexico?
Now let's talk about Canada though, because that's getting. We talked about the Emergency Powers Act yesterday. We talked to Austin Pelley, who's up there. The situation's very interesting in Canada. Now here's an idea though, and here's what I need. I'm sure you've got his number, Carmine. So just text it to me. I need Elon Musk on this. Do you have his number?
I'll call him right now.
Okay, so here's my idea. Ready? We need, he's very good at doing innovative things like the Boring Company. He's putting all these tunnels under LA for independent sort of subterranean trains, that kind of thing. So I think this is an Elon Musk kind of idea. Do you know what we need? This solves the two problems in one. At the Mexican border, we need to install one of those airwalk ramps, like you'll get across city streets sometimes, that goes from the Mexican border right up to Canada. So Mexicans can hop on that and take the express to Canada. You see what I'm saying? So that it gives them someplace else to go if you're from Honduras or wherever the hell people are from at the southern border. Because people from South America are going there. Rather than stopping in the U.S., we can send them straight into Canada. And if we do it right, we can even do one of those walkways, moving walkways, like they have at airports. Right?
Yeah.
And it's only 1,100 or so miles, right, from the Mexican border to the Canadian border. And if it went pretty fast, it'd kind of be a cool ride. So imagine you've been trekking through the desert with your family, brought in by coyotes, right? And it's been horrible. And now you can get on a cool rampway to Canada where weed's legal. I think a lot of people would take that option if there was a line down at the border in San Diego, this way Canada. And it doesn't seem to me like we're doing anything illegal or that liberals should have any problem with. We're just helping the poor migrants get somewhere else. Is that wrong?
Yeah.
But you see what I'm saying? Why I think I'm going to invent a new word. A musky idea, because he could make it cool, right?
He could.
Yeah. So so Elon, get right on that. Now, again, you're Canadian, and they wouldn't like this one bit in Canada. But you know what? Increasingly, we'll see. I think, now, let me ask you this, Carmine. Do you think that Justin Trudeau is overplaying his hand and that the Canadian people are going to turn on him in a way that he's not expecting? I don't mean punch him in the nose or anything. I mean politically. What do you think, Carmine?
Okay. I'll follow you.
Well, because I'm seeing that people everywhere, and nowhere is this clearer than in Canada. It's been clearer in Australia, though. People have had enough with this BS in general. And what Trudeau managed to do was combine the COVID BS with the racism BS. Does that make sense? Like,
oh, yeah. But they do that. That's what liberals do.
Now, why do you think that is? Have you analyzed that, Carmine? Tell us your theory on that.
It's easy. It's the last-ditch effort if you're losing. It's the last-ditch effort to say, oh, okay, we're getting killed in the public relations war. The guy against me, he's racist. And if you support him, you're a racist.
Right. Now, and by the way, let me just say this. What Justin Trudeau is thinking about, if you think about it, is that his country's got a big racism problem. You follow me? He's admitting that. He's saying Canadians are racist, which, have you ever thought of Canadians as overly racist?
There's not a lot of racism in Canada, to be honest with you.
Yeah. And, but he is accusing his own citizens of being racist. And by the way, the Confederacy, if someone's showing, are you one of those people? You can't be. I know you well enough to know this. If someone has a Confederate flag, first off, what do you, as a proud New Jerseyite, think of the Confederacy? Carmine Bob, tell us.
Carmine Bob. Not a big fan of the Confederacy. I think that they were traitors.
Boom, exactly right, yes. But on the other hand, if you saw, like, did Leonard Skinner scare you? Or the Dukes of Hazzard?
Love the Dukes of Hazzard. I used to climb my mother's car windows.
Right. And did you take that as a sign of racism on behalf of the Dukes of Hazzard?
I never thought that ever.
Right. And there's very good footage. Anyone can find this on YouTube of the band Guns N' Roses doing one of their best songs, in my opinion, Civil War, live. And Axl's wearing a big Confederate flag jacket, which, by the way, if you think about it, fashion-wise, is 100% appropriate when you're singing a song called Civil War, right?
Correct, yes.
And Civil War is Guns N' Roses' big anti-war anthem, because it is anthetic, anthematic. I don't know what the word is.
Is there a law that every musical act has to have an anti-war anthem?
There aren't nearly enough of them. But
I think
it's
there's too many of them.
No, why is that? Are you pro-war?
No, I'm not pro-war. To me, when a musical group does stuff like that, it's just kind of so forced. So, I don't know. I mean, in the 60s, when there was a war going on, yes. But this, when I see a band in the 80s whose, claim to fame really is smoking dope and drinking, and they're like, oh, we don't like war, too. It's like, nobody really wanted your social commentary, bro.
Well, no, but here's, and I'll say this in defense, I'm not a huge GNR fan, but Civil War by Guns N' Roses, one of the reasons it's a great song is that it doesn't go off on it, but it mentions Kennedy. And I think that does, what's that?
I said, wow, word.
Yeah. And I think tying that in, I'll put it like this. If I had to make something required viewing, not critical race theory, it would be Eisenhower's farewell speech. I think every school student should be watching Eisenhower's farewell speech at least once or twice by the time they hit 8th grade. Does that make sense? You've seen that, of course, right, Carmine?
Yes.
And when you've got a U.S. president and one who's a general warning about the military-industrial complex, that was so prophetic. And exactly what Eisenhower was warning about, including, his phrase, it's not just military-industrial complex. There's another word in there. I forget what it is, actually. But it always gets dropped. What's that?
We're going to talk about, we're going to talk about that. Let's talk about the fact that, Eisenhower met with aliens.
Okay, talk about that.
Did you know about that?
No.
So there is a very big conspiracy theory, and I'll tell you what, there's a lot of evidence I can't get too into here that something very fishy happened that weekend, but that Eisenhower directly met with aliens and made some kind of treaty with them that would allow them to kind of take Americans, very rarely, but take Americans to do experiments on, as long as we wouldn't shoot them out of the sky. Because there was something that we have that can actually, some kind of like the 5G is a thing that bothers airplanes. There was something we had that actually messed with the flying of the flying saucers, and the flying saucers sometimes would crash because of it. And so we had to give them basically spaces at some places in the country, which is why you only see them in, rural areas and stuff. You don't really see them in New York City. We had to mark off certain spaces in the country where they could do their work.
Now, where I'm going to object here is where you said you can't get into it here, because I don't know what that means. We've got about 8 minutes before the top of the hour. And if you can get into it, if there's any place on AM and FM radio, 105.5 FM, AM 1390, set into that at the bottom, so I might as well do it now. If there's any place you can get into, it would be here. So go for it, Carmine.
Well, no, it's a lot to get into,
But okay, we got 8 minutes, though.
So, I mean, the main thing is that he met with aliens a couple of times. There was something about that they couldn't, the reporters had no idea where he was, and they gave some kind of story. I think that he was at the dentist or whatnot. But it's pretty intense, and there's a lot of stuff about it. But apparently he met with them at Edwards Air Force Base. And I believe it was, yeah. So I believe it was it was even on, it was on the 10th season of American Horror Story double feature. And it was split into two parts, but it's not a joke. So it says President Dwight D. Eisenhower had went to Edwards Air Force Base and met with aliens, and there's people that were working at Edwards Air Force Base at the time who said that he was there.
Well, you've given me something, because here's what my sleep schedule is lately, in case anyone's keeping track at home. It's weird, and Jen knows this. Jen is on the line. We'll talk to Jen from New Jersey in 1 second. But Jen from Jersey, let me just get rid of the new, because people assume she's not in Jersey, England. But what happens is when the show's over, about 6 o'clock East Coast time, Carmine, I'm usually to sleep within about a half hour. And then I sleep from about 6:30 until about, 2 in the morning. So I'm getting 8 hours sleep. And then I'm up all night. And the other night...
So I want to tell you what happened, though, real quick. Let me say what happened. So
yeah,
so Dwight D. Eisenhower's official, cabinet said he went to the dentist. Okay, but there was no records of a dentist. Now, on that same night in question, the Associated Press reported that he died of a heart attack in Palm Springs. 2 minutes later, they retracted it, like was still alive.
That's weird. So you give me something, what I'm saying is you give me something freaky to look into at 2 in the morning. Thanks. Appreciate that.
He was on a golf vacation. He was on a golf vacation at that time, okay? And then he disappeared, basically. No reporters knew where he was, this and that. And his spokesman announced that he had visited a dentist, but he chipped a tooth while eating a chicken wing at dinner. I'm trying to remember this as I go. But basically, the aliens were supposed to be something like Nordics. They looked like human Scandinavians, let's say. That's what the Nordic aliens are said to look like.
As opposed to feline Scandinavians, like Scandinavian cats, you're saying, or
as opposed to the grays that you hear about all the time. And supposedly there was like telepathic communication, like you could hear a person but they're not speaking. So the first offer that they made was that they would share their wisdom and their technology with America if America would eliminate their nuclear weapons.
So while I'm waiting for the invasion tonight, I'll be looking into this, Carmine, but thanks for putting us on the path of this. Fantastic.
Yeah, it's amazing.
202-521-1320. Jen in Jersey, what is on your mind?
Oh, hi, guys. So, yeah, this is something I've actually looked into. I think they spoofed it in Men in Black with, like, Eisenhower supposedly meeting with the aliens at that base out in New Mexico or whatever. But I don't know if, Carmine, you've heard of Dr. Stephen Greer at all. But he's a big UFO alien type guy. He's actually a medical doctor. And I don't know if he had some level of intelligence in the past, like within the government, but he's not supposedly within it now. And he does a lot of talks on this. And if you haven't listened to him, you might be interested in it. But he has a different theory about the aliens. He does mention that we definitely have been in contact with them. I think he might mention Eisenhower with that. But he says that they're actually friendly and that the government tries to make them out to be scary. And that they're really just kind of observing us because they're so far beyond our technical capacity. But what they're worried...
No, what you're saying, this is the government's position on Russia? That's what you're saying, Jen?
No, we're talking about aliens.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, because it could have gone either way. But go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, so anyway, their big concern, though, with us is our nuclear capabilities. And they were really upset with us when we... I guess with the Hiroshima or something. But regardless, the point I wanted to make, the reason I called is this whole alien abduction thing. Stephen Greer goes into that in detail and says that he believes that people believe they've been abducted by aliens, but it's actually not aliens abducting them. It's government black ops. Like they give these people LSD, they put them on government UFOs and do experiments on them, but it's actually our government doing this to people and then dropping them off. It's not the real aliens, which, again, this is all, if you listen to Stephen Greer, he's pretty credible. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's just an ulterior theory to what the government tells us, instead of these aliens being these scary creatures that want to, like, do this stuff to us. It's more like the government is trying to scare us about these aliens. So I don't know what the real story is, but I just want to throw that out there as something to look into if you hadn't heard of them.
Well, I certainly want to believe he met with aliens. And by the way, just for the record, I dated a Jersey for 3 years, and she's my best friend now.
There we go. But that was at best the second coolest one, because Jen, our loyal listener Jen, is the coolest one. Sorry, Carmine.
It is not that Jersey. I don't know. My Jen's pretty cool, man.
I know, but where she's not here on the show right now, so go with the buttering up of this Jen. That's what I'm saying. And but Jen, great call. And Carmine, seriously, I'm not even joking. Very interesting topic that I don't know anything about, and I really will be looking into this. And I'm sure I'm not the only one, because I know a little about some of this stuff, but I don't know anything about this stuff. I know a little about some of the UFO stuff. I'll tell you where I actually learned a good deal of stuff from is the TV show Twin Peaks and the book that was written, ironically, by a guy, Mark Frost, not the progressive rock drummer economist we have on our show every Friday, but Mark Frost, who co-wrote Twin Peaks with David Lynch. There's a lot of UFO stuff in there. Carmine, thanks so much for coming on. It's sad Biden was so boring in his speech that we ended up talking about UFO stuff. But fascinating conversation. Jen, thanks for the call. Ingrid, thanks for the call. We got more coming up. 1 more hour. The best damn show in the world. It's The Backstory.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
And we are back, 105.5 FM, AM 1390. You're listening to the best damn radio show in the world, the show that brings you the truth behind the headlines. It's the backstory. Once again, awesome appearance by Carmine. It is always a lot of fun to have Carmine Sabia on, and I like it when we have Carmine and Jen from Jersey on, and it's a Jersey doubleheader. I always like that. A lot of fun there. And Jen and I, I'm sure we'll talk about some of this stuff later. Because she called me earlier, but I couldn't talk, so I still owe her a phone call. But joining us now for the final hour of today's show is our friend Jason Goodman. How you doing, Jason?
Well, Lee, I just caught the tail end of the UFO conversation. I don't know if you touched on whether or not any of that information pertains to the MC Chris theory that Boba Fett's entire purpose was just to pay off the financing on a Corvette. Is that part of that information?
Boba Fett and Corvettes did not come up. I can assure you of that. I would remember that.
That's a different story. Yeah, that's a different story. Sorry.
But I was actually going to ask you about it because when we got into the Carmine discussion about UFOs and Dwight D. Eisenhower and stuff like that, I knew you were coming on, so I wanted to talk to you about it. And I'll do it. Say the name of the show and watch what happens, Jason. It's a lot of fun.
The backstory. The backstory. I always screw it up, Lee. I'm sorry. I don't know. Only you have the magic for that.
Well, all it is, here's the trick. Ready? Here's a lesson. Yeah. Just say the name of the show and then shut up.
The backstory.
Well, okay, it's too late now. Now it's just sad.
I'm telling you, I can't do it. I cannot.
When you say it, you make it, you plant it like a gymnast.
Yeah.
You know, does a plant when they come off the uneven parallel bars.
Point my toes and everything. Yeah. I mean, listen, it's going to come. It's just not ready yet, I guess. Well, with time, like anything.
Right. But one of the things that's exciting about, because by the way, I'm very pleased with myself. That's not new, by the way. But I'm an innovator in that this rotating co-host idea, because what happened was I'm either an innovator or desperate. Because what happened, if everyone remembers, we were doing what they call an orderly transition of power, where we knew weeks in advance that John Kiriakou would be leaving as co-host, right? So weeks in advance, orderly transition of power. And then Austin Pelley.
Mike Pence to obstruct?
No, not Pence. No, then Austin Pelley was going to be joining us as a co-host. Then my son Shane became an insurrectionist, and he decided to go follow his bliss, which involves bicycling across the country. And so he left his job as the co-host of Fault Lines, a job he loved, by the way, and he may be back at some point, who knows, because he did love working here, and he left on, as far as I can tell, good terms with everybody. But then suddenly, that morning, when we were about to do the show, I didn't have a co-host anymore in the afternoon, because it was going to be an orderly transition of power with Austin Pelley, who's up in Ottawa right now. Possibly picking up girls with my son Jack. So now, then I came up, you know how desperation sometimes leads to genius. You know what I'm saying?
It's the mother of invention, yeah.
So I said, well, here's the thing. I've done the show solo before, where I had no co-host. But I like bouncing stuff off people. You know what I'm saying? That sounds dirtier than I meant it to. But I like feed. I'll tell you, this is one of the reasons I did stand-up like twice, and I didn't like it. I did improv for like 10 years, and I liked it.
Right.
And one of the reasons I didn't like stand-up is I didn't like the feeling of writing down jokes and memorizing them. Because in my head, they're all going to bomb. So then when I get on
You're
stage
way
to start,
funnier spontaneously, like just in conversation. That's where you thrive.
well, that's a theory, and I appreciate you saying that. But I will say, when I was doing scripted political comedy back in 2007, I developed, Time and Newsweek called me a genius and stuff. So I can do scripted stuff, but I didn't like the process of standing on stage, saying a joke that I'd written, and then nothing.
Yeah.
See, if I'm making it up on the spot, I can console myself that I just made it up on the spot. But if I wrote it,
yeah,
then it's like,
effort.
Right, I thought it was funny. So,
right.
So I've really enjoyed you being on, Carmine, Mark Frost,
thank you,
Kerry Smith, and Carter Laren as the co-host, because, but I'm about to praise you even more, Jason. Don't you worry. More of an ego stroke is coming.
Okay.
Because one of the things I've liked is I've liked having people on, like sometime we had Carmine on with Yakov Shapiro a couple weeks ago. We got to get you on with Yakov Shapiro because you and I have talked about Yakov many times. And I'd love to get him on our Patreon show too, but I'd love to have him on this show with you as well. There's a nice mix of having, do you know what it's like? We're like the Asia, we're like the cream of Sputnik talk shows now. Because Asia and cream, of course, were super groups, right?
Right. Yes. Yes.
So
that's true.
So I feel like when we've got Yes was not a super group at the time because no one had heard of them. Asia was a lot of people who'd been in, it's Carl Palmer from Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Right.
And so on, Jeff Downs, John Wetton on bass from UK and King Crimson.
Only time will tell.
That's what they say. And Mark Frost and I have talked about Asia before because he's a big Carl Palmer fan. And I saw Asia in Boston in the 80s. And that was fun.
Did Boston open for Asia in Boston? Or that would have the world would have imploded.
Well, not only that, but Boston imploded in a way. Brad Delp, the lead singer from Boston, died. Well, committed suicide, I believe.
Oh, man, I didn't know that.
Boston had a tragic end for a great frickin' band. That first album from Boston with More Than a Feeling on it and everything, that was such a good album. They don't make them like that anymore.
Right. And the art also, they had that spaceship, I remember. Speaking of UFOs, Lee, this is a totally relevant conversation.
See, it's tied in. No, exactly right. And in fact, when I bought my sons a record player for Christmas, my younger sons, I bought them a picture disc of Boston's first album.
Wow. Picture disc. That's a throwback to the 80s, I would say.
Yeah, but it's kind of, if you're like a 9-year-old, even if you hate my guts, which they do right now, I figured a picture disc of a classic album is a good way to go.
Yeah.
Well, apparently I can go wrong by getting married, but there's no taking that one back. But by the way, I talked to a lawyer today. This is my exciting life. So
sounds like my day.
And I got a retainer agreement. Now all I have to do is give someone thousands of dollars, and they'll be my friend. But let me ask you this, because you've dealt with lawyers, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I feel very good about this divorce lawyer I'm talking about, and he's a partner in a highly rated divorce firm here in Sioux Falls. I'm going to tell you what his rate is per hour, and tell me it seems low to me. And don't forget, he's one of the names on the firm. He's a partner. He's highly respected. He's done 30 cases in front of the South Dakota Supreme Court.
Wow.
His hourly rate is $300 an hour.
I mean, compared to New York or Washington, D.C., it's very low. But
That seemed
But
very
still.
reasonable to me, right?
I mean, it's sort of like when you walk into the, I don't know, Ferrari dealership and they say, well, this one's $980,000, but this one's only $200,000. It's like, oh, well, that seems reasonable. It's still a car. So $300 is a lot of money to earn in an hour. But I agree with you. For a lawyer, particularly a partner in the firm, that is a good rate. And Lee, I am totally out of the business of giving anybody any kind of legal advice. But I do think that a lawyer can help you, and I hope that will be the case.
Well, I've reached that point because I've said, for anybody who's heard me talk about the divorce a little bit on the show, Jason actually knows more, and so does Jen. My friends know more. I really got a crazy situation. Is that fair to say, Jason?
Yeah, it's terrible.
It's kind of unbelievable. I've not seen my younger kids since June. One time. And there are people who are child beaters, right?
Yeah,
who assault
who hang
their
out
children.
with the kids all day.
That's right. Whereas me, I haven't seen my kids since June, and it's horrible. But
the worst thing you did was buy a Boston picture disc.
Yeah, well, yes, afterwards. No, the mistake was the marriage in the first place. Let me just say that. And what did you say there, Saul?
We have
You
callers.
wouldn't have your kids.
Wait, who's on?
We have Nick from Florida, and then Therese.
Forgive me. Thanks for the reminder. There's our great multifaceted engineer, Saul. Reminded me of something he told me a while ago, and I'd completely forgotten about. Nick from Florida, 202-521-1320. Thanks for your patience. Hey, Nick, you're on with Jason Goodman. What's on your mind, sir?
Hey, no problem. That was a good conversation. I enjoyed it. Hey, Lee and Jason, I'd like to get your opinion on this. I was born in '84, and it's a little off topic from what you guys were talking about, but I remember growing up and everybody was talking about how America is the great melting pot. And I saw something online the other day where it kind of looked like people were, quote-unquote, melting together again. And I was just wondering what your opinion is on when we diverge from that idea. Sadly, on hold, I think I answered my own question. I think it was when Obama got in office. But I was just curious what your opinion was on that, and if you have any more information on maybe what kind of happened to that whole idea.
Well, so Andrew Breitbart used to talk about this sometimes, in terms of e pluribus unum, that idea from many one. And where the race card really started getting played in modern politics, it was the commies. It was the communist parties. And they started really ginning up. If anyone wants to go look up We Charge Genocide, and there are some people, this is one of the reasons I like talking to communists on this network, because a lot of them, like I guarantee you, Caleb Maupin was on, the great RT correspondent and author. He knows a lot about, he's educated, he's a commie, but he's very educated about it. So when I brought up the connection of communism to May Day, you know, the holiday May Day, Jason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Caleb knew so much of that history, stuff that I didn't know, and it's just boom. So I guarantee knows about this. This is not a minor campaign. It was something called We Charge Genocide. Are you familiar with that, Jason?
I have not heard of that.
We should talk about it sometime on our Patreon show, because it's actually fascinating. If anyone goes and looks up We Charge Genocide, this is a campaign in like the 30s or 40s. There was essentially Black Lives Matter in the 30s or 40s, and it was pushed by the Communist Party. And that use of, and like I say, this is around the time that you had the Frankfurt School coming to the U.S., around the 40s and 50s. In fact, if I think about when We Charge Genocide was, it was not the 30s, it was 40s and 50s.
The internet says 1951.
Yeah, there we go.
Crime of government against the Negro people is what this says. William L. Patterson was the editor, and a preface by Ozzie Davis.
Yes, that's right. And people forget that Ossie Davis, who's in Do the Right Thing, Spike Lee film,
right.
People forget that a lot of these people were committed communists. And this is where the melding, and if you're reading about it online or something, Jason, you'll see it was a very big campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And became very influential. And We Charge Genocide is where I think they introduced the Frankfurt School's idea. You know, it gets called cultural Marxism, but the idea was, rather than, it's a break from traditional communism. It's a break from pure Marxism. Marx believed that class struggle was the central struggle. And the Frankfurt School believed that you could have other things other than class. And so they introduced race, and then later gender and sexuality and stuff like that, or general ethnic heritage went into it. But that's right. It's a great question, Nick. So that's my answer. Does that make, for me, just you doing cursorily looking it up, you see what I'm saying? It was a big deal.
Yeah.
Right, Jason?
I mean, you know, with regard to the question, I mean, it's a good question because I'm not sure when that happened, but it strikes me as one of those things. Like I was looking in the mirror this morning, and I mean, people see me on the show. I don't know if people would say that I'm fat, but I looked in the mirror this morning and I said, you know something, I've gained weight. And it just occurred to me that it's one of those things. Charles Ortel, who's going to be joining us in just a few minutes, has spoken frequently about this statement with regard to how do you go bankrupt? And the answer is gradually and then all of a sudden. And it's kind of like gaining weight. There is, I think, a day where you look in the mirror and you say, oh, holy crap, I've gained some weight. And it's kind of like this change from the melting pot to this perception of all this racism. You know, as I look back on my life, I feel like for most of my life, race relations were improving. People like Spike Lee were being recognized as directors and winning awards and becoming the president of the Cannes jury and things that perhaps in 1951 black people weren't able to do. We had a black president. I felt like race relations in general were improving, and then all of a sudden we found ourselves in the middle of what's got to be the worst racial relations we've had since the civil rights movement.
Well, let me tell you what I think caused that. If you look at the timeline, it goes to the universities. In other words, the first generations were teaching people like Bill Ayers and all the people in the Weather Underground. A lot of them became Kathy Boudin, Bernadine Dorn.
Yeah.
They went into the universities. And what do you know what Bill Ayers taught specifically?
I don't. Law, I think, no?
No. Teachers. He taught education. So in other words, he, a committed communist, was teaching the teachers. And those teachers, that's the next generation. And those teachers who were taught by those guys, the radical communists, and I'll put it like this. When you're blowing up bombs and trying to kill people, I would call you radical. Some may disagree, but I don't disagree. So then they taught the teachers, then the teachers taught other teachers, and by now we're about the fourth generation down. And the stuff that seemed radical in the 60s now is just stuff your teacher taught you. Does that make sense, Jason?
Right. Yeah, and not only that, Lee, they made no secret about this. Bernadine Dorn released a Weather Underground manifesto to a radio station. They sent a cassette where she said, guard your planes, guard your schools, guard your children. And I think she also said, guard your banks. And I found it very interesting when the New York Times published an interview with Bill Ayers about his book that had just been released. The interview was published on September 11th, 2001, and the headline was something like "No Regret for a Love of Explosives." And I think people really need to take note of the fact that the targets on September 11th were the Pentagon, which the Weather Underground had bombed previously, the World Trade Center, which has got a lot of banks in it, and it used airplanes, and they said, guard your airplanes. And they also said, guard your schools, and look at what's happening now. So, I don't know.
And Bernadine Dohrn also said, and people need to remember this, lock up your daughter, lock up your wife, lock up your back door and run for your life. No, wait, hang on. That wasn't Bernadine Dohrn. That was Bon Scott from AC/DC. Forgive me, in the song TNT.
Similar.
But it is similar. There we go. 202-521-1320. Sharif, thanks for your patience. What is on your mind, sir?
Thanks for the call. How you doing, y'all? Thanks for taking my call. First, I'd like to say free Julian Assange. Okay. Putin and Stoltz met today, and they're both talking about, what happened in Europe dealing with major war. And by them showing both humility to humanity, especially Stoltz on the German side, it sent like the price of gas down, decreased by 14%. And thank God, Stoltz, that movement, what he was talking about, it seems like they're not going to really, they're not going to really give Ukraine a thumbs up, maybe in the future to join NATO. Maybe they might give it a thumbs down, hopefully. So it looks like him and Putin had a good meeting today. Second comment is dealing with the trucker campaign. What they need to do, because it seems like they're going to try to go after their funds or whatever, they can just leave Ottawa, go home, and just sit. Don't deliver don't deliver no heavy freight because they have the trucks to do it. And by doing that, they can affect the Canada economy. Now, they had rumors yesterday talking about, that they should have a bank run on the banks to punish, Trudeau for going after the, bank accounts and, and also going after the people that gave money to the trucker foundations, right? Like give.
Well, let me point out what you're saying, Tree, because it's a very important point. A great call as usual. Very important point. Then I'll throw it back to you. Is that the way they froze the money up in Canada? They had to give the government more extra power they didn't have before to freeze that money, and that's very frightening. And so you're making a very good point there, Tree. Keep going. I just want to point that out.
Before I get to my last comment, okay, your boy Jack Posobiec was him and some other people was telling people that, hey, on 4chan, they was talking about having a bank run on Canada. That's not going to happen. They're going to shut that down day or day and a half. You know what I'm saying? It's not going to happen. But the truckers go home and don't move no freight. That's how you mess with the economy like that. My last comment, you heard about the metal specialist scientist dealing with the U.S. Navy for 3 decades was forging test results?
Yes, the woman who was forging test results on the steel that gets used in submarines.
Whoa.
Yes.
Did you hear that, Jason?
I just heard it right now. I haven't heard about that before. Stunning.
She'd done it for a couple of decades, too. And so, do you know where you don't want your metal to be in bad shape is in a submarine?
No.
Right?
Yeah, a lot of pressure there.
Yes. So keep going, Sharif.
But yeah, it was half of the test sample she gave to the Navy, which is 50%. From 1985 to 2017, somehow they found out, and they gave her 2.5 years in jail for being, pride and ego, crime of pride and ego. You know what I'm saying? That's not good. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, I appreciate it, gentlemen, and also, freedom of speech for everybody. Thank you.
Well, your great call as usual, Sharif. And also, you brought up one other point that I just want to mention prayerfully, then we'll go to Brave. Is that the other thing that's going forward is the prosecution of this couple who lived in Annapolis, Maryland, and also at a place in West Virginia, who had sold secrets. You've heard about this. Who had sold secrets to a foreign government, and they've been accused of treason. Did you see that, Jason?
I'm sorry, I was just reading about this Elaine Thomas with the medal on the submarine. I don't think I've heard about that other story.
The treason one, that's a big story too. Very big story. What's interesting about it is they're not saying what the foreign country is.
Oh, the guy in the Navy. Yes, I did see that yesterday. And his wife is involved, or she's not involved?
She is involved. They were bad.
I saw that story yesterday. And they said he's giving information to a foreign country, and they're giving him only 12 and a half to 17 years because he's cooperating by telling him where the information went or something like that.
But the most interesting thing to me is we don't know what the country is. So some people are saying Israel. That makes logical sense. I haven't seen anything that contradicts that, but I haven't seen anything that proves that either. But it's clearly
What's
an
the guy's
ally.
last name?
It's a name that could be German, could be Jewish. It's not a name like Goodman or anything like that. Don't worry, Jason.
Right.
But it's one of those names where, there's certain names you go, that could be German, that could be Jewish. It's sort of both. Right.
Yeah.
202-521-1320. Brave, I want to get to Brave real quick because we're almost out of time for the segment. Hey, Brave, how you doing?
Hey, how's it going? I hope you guys are having a great evening. I just wanted to call in two things really quickly. What's going on in Canada with them, those extreme powers and being able to freeze and literally steal funds. That is pretty frightening, and I wish that more people were talking about it. I'm glad that at least on Sputnik you guys are talking about it and some of the other independent outlets. Do you think that what's going on in Australia, Australia and Canada could possibly be like a forecast for what we could be seeing coming to the United States and other places?
Well, yeah, that's what I've been saying. I think we're seeing around the world populations. And Jason, great call, Brave. Thanks very much. Jason, one thing I was saying yesterday, and I was talking to a friend of mine about this today, and going off a little bit more on this, is that this idea, Jason, that basically, who hasn't ever used the power of workers is people on the right. If you think of unions, they've traditionally been from the left, right? Correct? In other words. Yeah. But if you think about it today, I think most working class people who really work, are on the right. Does that make sense?
Certainly financially conservative, yeah.
Yes, but I would say even on a lot of this stuff, I'll put it like this. When you've got the Democrats openly supporting illegal immigration, that's not good for workers, and workers know that. So imagine if the right started using the power of the working class to strike and stuff like that. Imagine if that happened. And the more I think about it, the more I think it's a good tactic. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
That's another thing we may talk about on our Patreon show. Because the more I think about it, the more I'm like, because here's what everybody knows. Stuff is weird and sucks in our politics right now, and something needs to be done, right?
I think most people feel that way.
Imagine if you started getting strikes across the country by people who are on the right broadly. Imagine the impact that would have. Because everyone's...
I think we're seeing it in Canada.
Yes, that's where I'm cribbing the idea from. And I'm realizing there's something very interesting going on. But coming up, and we're going to be talking about Hillary Clinton with the great Charles Ortel, who Jason does a show with. I was saying, one of the great things about having co-hosts, now they're bringing their own guests, which is great. And I want to talk about Hillary Clinton's and see what Charles knows about, because he knows a lot about Hillary, about her leftist connections when she was at Yale and working to defend the Black Panthers in the murder of Alex Raxley. I'm interested in what Charles may know about that. And it sort of ties in what we were just talking about with Charles' area of expertise. And we got a lot more to talk about coming up on The Backstory.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime.
I like beer. Yeah, we drank beer.
Whoever's in charge, and I want them recorded.
Let's talk about that.
Discussing all the controversies and news across the disunited states of America. Tune in to Fault Lines every weekday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern, only on Radio Sputnik.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Hi, I'm political analyst Garland Nixon.
And I'm political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist Dr. Wilmer Leon.
We're the co-hosts for The Critical Hour, airing Monday through Friday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time here on Radio Sputnik in Washington, D.C.
We close out your day with a thorough and hard-hitting analysis of the day's top stories, where we bring in brilliant scholars, authors, and investigative journalists from around the world.
And on Fridays, it's panel time, when we do a roundup of the week's most important issues.
Join us to keep up with the world's top stories.
Enjoy an in-depth analysis.
And have a little fun along the way. Listen to our show,
The Critical Hour, Monday through Fridays on Radio Sputnik.
And we are back, 105.5 FM, AM 1390 in Washington, D.C. I'm investigative journalist Lee Stranahan. We are joined by a great friend of the show and our Tuesday co-host in the second hour, Jason Goodman. And Jason brought his own guest. You tell people about the show you do with Charles Ortel. Jason, pimp that show.
Charles and I have two regular shows each week. On Wednesdays, we have Charles Ortel is Closing In. And on Sundays, we have Sunday with Charles. We've been doing these shows since 2017, and Charles has focused on the complex fraud that is the Clinton Foundation.
And we'll be talking about that, but since we got Charles on, let me just ask you, Charles, since you know a lot about Hillary Clinton, how much do you know about her time at Yale when she was helping the Black Panthers defense in the New Haven Panthers trial? Do you know much about that?
Of 1974, so she was long gone at that time. I believe, through good sources I have there, that instead of taking 3 years to get through Yale, she took 4. There are reports that she did not pass the bar in the first go-round, and she fell in from being a Republican in her youth. Once she got to Wellesley and then to Yale Law School, she became very enamored of the hard left, and as you mentioned, was participated in the Black Panther defense trial as a law student.
And then when she went out to Berkeley, where she eventually lived with Bill Clinton, this is early in their relationship, she worked for Truhat Bernstein. Truhat Bernstein was a very well-known communist law firm. They weren't hiding they were a communist law firm. They were well-known as a radical left law firm. And in fact, one of the things I found interesting, people forget in that early period how quickly Bill and Hillary went from radical left to kind of conservative Attorney General of Arkansas, right? Do you know what I'm talking about, Charles? Does that make sense? Is that fair?
Well, yeah. What happened is they moved back to Arkansas, and Bill was Attorney General for 1 2-year term, I believe. And then he ran and won the governorship. But his first term was a disaster. He managed to alienate the very people who had supported him. He came across a bit like a scruffy version of AOC, assembling a band of hard left, lightly credentialed people to try to remake Arkansas in their image, and proceeded to really as I said, alienate all the factions that could be alienated, and he got bounced out of there.
And one of the things that happened was one of the principals at True at Bernstein, I'm forgetting one of the names. I think Goodwin, maybe, I forget what the other woman's name is, who was part of that firm. She was quoted in the newspaper because Bill Clinton came out. He's in Arkansas. It's a pro-death penalty state. He came out for the death penalty. And the communists she'd worked with in the Bay Area thought that was a real betrayal of their ideals, and were quoted in the newspapers at the time saying, we don't know what happened to Hillary, basically. But I think it shows that, to me, what I learned from that is that although they do have this ideological background in the hard left, for instance, we know that Hillary Clinton wrote her master's thesis on Saul Alinsky, and she was friends with Alinsky. We know that from letters that they exchanged back and forth. They're also very practical. They really have no... do you think it's fair to say that at the end of the day, they say whatever they need to say to get elected at any point, Charles?
I do, and it's such a shame. And you think back to that period and then Bill Clinton's presidency from 92, really January 93 to January 2001. This was a moment in American history where we held all the cards. We were the superpower. And instead of cementing and building upon that position and setting a good example for the rest of the world to follow, the Clinton administration really, I would argue, participated in giving away Hong Kong on a treaty that did not hold up. They enabled the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Liberation Army to increase and cement their control over that great nation, much to the detriment of the people of China. And we could go over many other failures, which were sort of covered up because in that time frame, forces that had been building up since World War II contributed to a gigantic economic expansion in the number of active people aged 25 to 54, in terms of corporations taking advantage of the fall of the Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall. So we had a period of really unparalleled economic expansion and blunder after blunder internationally while Bill was president and Hillary was being co-president.
And a lot of what we're seeing now with this Ukraine-Russia narrative comes out of people who were empowered during that period after the breakup of the Soviet Union that Bill Clinton was in cahoots with because, and I pointed this out, one of the people that Bill Clinton went to college with, of course, at Oxford, roomed with Strobe Talbot. Strobe Talbot's brother-in-law is a guy named Cody, there's Cody Shearer, but there's also Derek Shearer. Derek Shearer was a advisor with the investment firm, the Ziff Brothers, Ziff Investments. Oh, yeah. And so what do you know about that, Charles? What do you know about Derek Shearer? Is he someone you looked into very much?
I've looked into Cody. I know a lot more about what I would argue was the rape and plunder of the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe at the behest of globalist academics like Jeffrey Sachs and frankly, corrupt investors like Mark Rich and others engaged in a long-term program, as the Berlin Wall fell and then as the Soviet Union fell apart, of working with insiders inside these countries to acquire assets, state-owned assets at fire sale prices, and then either flip them for gigantic profits or hold on to them to collect gigantic dividends. And this is a process which, frankly, when you look back in hindsight, is disgraceful that so many, in theory, esteemed Western academics and financiers would participate in this. And I know that it has created deep-seated enmity and anger across these countries and suspicion about dealing with people in the West, validly so.
And by the way, that's where the Ziff Brothers come in, because the Ziff Brothers were trying to buy up Gazprom stock at a time when the amount of foreign investment was limited. And a guy like Derek Shearer, he was not an energy guy. He was in there because he had the connections to Bill Clinton and Strobe Talbot, who was the main guy on Russia in the Clinton administration. And So the Ziff brothers were working with Bill Browder, the guy behind the Magnitsky Act, and he was the guy directly. Derek Shear was working with Browder for, as you say, the plunder. Where when we're talking about assets, we're literally talking about trillions of dollars in assets, trillions with a T. It's not those little penny ante millionaire schemes. Russia's one of the biggest energy producers. I think it's the biggest when you combine gas and oil. I think it's the biggest energy producer in the world. And getting control of the companies that controlled that energy was job number one for a lot of people after the fall of the Soviet Union. And you're right, it has created a lot of enmity. That's a good way to put it. Now let's turn to anything you want to add on that before we turn to this latest stuff that's come out in the Durham investigation, Charles?
No, I think you've summed it up well.
Well, thank you. Very an honor for you, someone like you, to say that. Thank you. So let's talk about this Durham filing that CNN is currently trying to bury and pretend is in a story. This Durham filing seems to show, first off, would you agree that when we talk about the DNC in 2016, you can use that term interchangeably with the Hillary Clinton campaign because they secretly took over the DNC. Do you think that's fair, or am I being mean to Hillary?
No, I think it's absolutely fair. I mean, I think when I look back at the 2015-16 period, and it was actually early in March 2015 that I began my quest to expose crooked charities, including the Clinton Foundation, but also now with Jason, the conservative political, the American Conservative Union and American Conservative Union Foundation. So it's not a partisan exercise for us. What happened by, I think, August of 2015 is the law firm Perkins Coie that was representing Hillary Clinton and the nascent Hillary Clinton campaign organized an agreement with the nearly bankrupt DNC to effectively surrender control of the treasury of the DNC to the Hillary Clinton campaign. And, this whole process of the Bernie rallies, I actually went to the Bernie rally, and I'm not a Democrat and I'm not a supporter of Bernie, but just to see it here in Washington Square Park in New York City, there was genuine enthusiasm for Bernie. I mean, there really was. And Hillary and her team, her minions, and likely including this Mark Elias and others, they just short-circuited the whole primary process. I mean, if we care about global warming, what we should have done in 2015 and 16 is just not have any Democratic Party primaries, not have any debates, because Hillary had that all rigged. And I believe there's solid evidence on that, an extensive involvement of this Perkins Coie firm and Mark Elias. And so what the Durham set of filings tells us, I think, is that, first of all, John Durham has a grand jury impaneled, which is very different than at any time in the past when the Clintons have come under scrutiny. In 16, when the lanky and loopy James Comey was, in theory, investigating the emails with his team at the FBI and DOJ, they didn't have a grand jury. So they weren't able to put the kind of pressure on people that Durham can now put. Supposedly, there are a lot of people who've been interviewed so far. Kash Patel says 24 people. I don't know if that's true or false, but it's certainly a number. And there have got to be a lot of people around this failure, this two-time loser, Hillary Clinton, who are looking at their costs and looking at the costs of defending themselves and looking at this mess and looking at the plight of the Democratic Party and saying, you know what? I don't see a lot of benefit of continuing to defend these people. And Durham, the Democrats and Sussman and others are going to attack him. But he has a very good record. I mean, I don't like Eric Holder, but I think Eric Holder tasked Durham with investigating the Connecticut governor, who Durham put the governor and his wife in prison, who was a Republican. So he's a tough on crime dude. And this appears to me to be a gigantic ongoing criminal conspiracy, the kind that Hillary accused right-wingers of waging against Bill going back in 1992 and 3. I think she's been doing this her whole life, and now I think and hope she's been caught.
Well, Jason, I'm going to throw it to you in 1 second. Let me just one other point here that I think is important. is we were talking about this earlier with Carmine Sabia, and I said because this is a criminal investigation where people have been indicted, this story, what I said was, if all the information that Durham had come out with in this filing on Friday, if let's say it was a Peter Schweitzer story, who's also Peter can do very good investigation. Let's say he'd come out with an article about that. I would say that's a 2-day story because they'll get him bury the story. But because this is an actual indictment, we know there's other beats coming. We know there's other acts to this play. There's people walking into court. There's opening statements. There's a jury being impaneled, and so on. So to your point, this is a real prosecution. Do you see my point there about the difference between if this has just been a story, Charles?
Absolutely, and I'm quite familiar with what was going on in 2016 because the efforts that I undertook to expose the Clinton Foundation got a lot of press across mainstream media as well as the hard left, progressive radio, and elsewhere, and of course on Sputnik. So if we go back in narrowly into October of 2016, remember that's the Billy Bush episode. They thought they had Trump on the ropes. They thought they had rid of him. He surprised them at the second debate. In an epic move, bringing the 4 women there to the press conference. And then he did a great job, frankly, in the debates. And he came on strong. But Hillary thought the death.
Well, I'm sorry, Charles cut out there. What happened there, Saul?
You there?
Oh, we got you.
He's
Yeah.
still there.
Okay, you're back. You're back, Charles.
Sorry.
You cut out there. Just
Sorry
say the
about
very
that.
last part of which. No, it's not. Go ahead. What was the last part of what you're saying?
Yeah, so back in mid-October 2016, that's around the time that Jake Sullivan, who frankly deserves to be, he's the President National Security Advisor, who I think has an amazing resume but has no common sense and is, apparently has no morals either. They concocted this story about the Russian server traffic from Trump Tower and other Trump sites into Russia. Hillary had that tweet that was outrageous that cited a statement from Jake Sullivan. And they thought they had cooked Trump's goose in mid-October. They thought they were measuring the curtains in the White House. And it didn't work out exactly that way for them. So, for what they did in the campaign and beyond that, for what they've done to the rule of law, I mean, these are not people, Jake Sullivan and Hillary Clinton and others, these are not minor figures running for some alderman position in a Midwestern town. These are people who believe they are entitled to sit atop the pinnacle of power, which is declining now, but nonetheless in Washington, D.C., by right, by name. And they also believe that there should be no negative consequences for them stirring up the bad will, accentuating bad will between Russia and the United States, the way the Democrats in particular have done from 2015 to the present, or even really 2014 to the present. So there should be.
I'd say 2012, by the way. That's when the Magnitsky Act came out.
All right, 12 to the present. I bow to your judgment. But I think there really does need to be a thorough investigation. It needs to be a public investigation. It can't just be, blowhards standing in front of microphones, bragging to one another about the tough questions they're going to ask. It has to be an investigation with teeth. The Clinton family and other dynastic political families have amassed vast fortunes, in theory, serving the people, but in practice, serving their own financial and political interests. That is not a good message to leave down in history for generations to follow us. You cannot allow this kind of behavior to go away unpunished. And I really hope that Durham will have the latitude, the money, time to make the case that he needs to make here to restore the balance of justice inside this country.
And by the way, before I throw it to you, Jason, real quickly, you mentioned Comey. One of the reasons I say 2012 is I think understanding the Magnitsky Act roles in this and Bill Browder's role is central to understanding it. And one of the ways it's central is that Hermitage Capital, Bill Browder's company, was owned by none other than HSBC. And HSBC, people may know this, but James Comey, after he left the Department of Justice, but before he was with the FBI, was on the board of HSBC. And this is right around the time that HSBC had done an agreement over money laundering with the DOJ. And so I think Comey went into the board of HSBC kind of as a fixer to smooth things over. And because of HSBC's ownership of of Hermitage Capital, it would have violated their money laundering agreement, because this was what Hermitage was doing, was money laundering. So that's why I mentioned that, Charles. See, it's always fun. And again, it really is an honor. It's great to have you on the show, because when someone like Charles comes on, he knows so much that I'm listening and I'm picking up notes and everything. And I sort of like to compare notes with him and say, well, did you know this? Because a guy like Charles, things are going to possibly click that wouldn't click for me. Does that make sense?
Well, thanks a lot.
I've noticed it a million times, guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
the other thing to mention, the other thing to mention quickly is when we talk of money laundering, we think of Geneva, and we think of Epstein, and I think there were a number of different banks engaged in money laundering, tagged for money laundering, and a number of Clinton Foundation donors who routed donations to that theoretical foundation, which in fact I don't believe exists lawfully, from Switzerland.
Yeah, and the Clinton Foundation itself, you mentioned Epstein he was one of the founders of the Clinton Foundation, correct? Was that or the Clinton Global Initiative?
No,
What's
absolutely not. So
no, that's alleged in the letter signed by Dershowitz.
Right, but
no,
that's factually
Clinton Global Initiative, right?
But it's factually incorrect. So in order for there to be a charity, you have to have, if it's a corporation, articles of incorporation and bylaws. The first Clinton Global Initiative was held in New York in September of 2005. At that time, there were no articles of incorporation for the parent. There were no bylaws. There was no legitimate audit. They hadn't registered to operate and solicit funds in New York State. And the Clinton Global Initiative is certainly, in my mind, not a charity. It's a gab fest. It's a chance to get your close people in a room concocting deals, perhaps in the former Soviet Union and elsewhere. It's a business development and political advancement exercise. It's a scheme. It was never properly audited. There's no real reports on it until 2009. Those are factually incorrect. They're materially misstated. And I could go on.
Okay, Jason, let me throw it to you for a question of Charles, who you talked to twice a week already, so I didn't feel bad about kind of stepping on you here, Jason, but go ahead.
It's okay. Well, no, I don't ever question so much as I just, look at what's going on here. And for days, it's been the U.S., the government and the U.S. media clamoring about imminent invasion here in Ukraine, and it hasn't happened yet. And today we see Russia drawing down, according to U.S. reports. The thing that is intriguing to me is that there was just a tiny little mention yesterday that they had shut down the entire U.S. embassy in Kiev and moved it to somewhere else in Ukraine. And it just strikes me that this is the type of thing that, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, if and when Biden is ever being prosecuted and we go to the key evidence and they say, that got destroyed in the emergency at the embassy in Kiev. I just wonder to what extent this isn't all a distraction from something else.
Charles, what do you think about
point,
that?
Jason.
It is a very good point, yeah. Charles, anything on that?
Well, yeah, so I would argue from 88, 89 forward, our federal government has gotten enormously powerful, and the people who run it, whether they're in the executive branch or around it in the Senate and elsewhere, have too much influence. Influence that's significant, that can make the lives of certain foreign businesses and politicians and others miserable. Alternatively, it can make a lot of money for those foreign powers, and it can make a lot of money for vendors to the federal government. And so these extended dynastic political families, the Bidens, the Clintons, the Bushes, have just too much influence, and the Washington, D.C. crowd, no inclination, it would seem, to actually prosecute anybody for acting as an unregistered foreign agent of a hostile power, which I would certainly argue that the Bidens were doing. I mean, the Biden laptop apparently Hunter Biden laptop has all kinds of incriminating evidence on it. Do we decide to look at that before the election? No. Do we look at it after the election? No. And that's just, I don't want to pick just on the Biden family. How did the Bush family get so rich? How did Mitch McConnell get so rich? How does so many of these senators become powerful lobbyists? How do they get paid for all that? How do these books get priced that all of them write? I mean, the graft in Washington, D.C. and corruption is there for the common person to see. As you were saying at the intro, it does make sense for people on the right and the left, the working people who balance their own budgets, who can't count on bank financing, who can't count on handouts. They and we know how tough this world is. It's the connected elitists, the arrogant elitists who have held themselves above the law, whether they're on the right or the left. And examples, they're innocent till proven guilty, but they need to go through an investigative and a court process. And if this has been an epic corruption fest since 88 and 89, retribution must be paid, and people who committed the harshest crimes need to go to prison.
Well, and as I've mentioned before, on the Magnitsky Act, that was funded openly. If anyone goes to opensecrets.org, they can find it very quickly, by Mikhail Khodorkovsky, at one point the richest man in Russia, an oligarch, an old school oligarch in a real way. And Khodorkovsky was on the board of the Carlyle Group, so there's your Bush connection. And when Vladimir Putin put him in jail, he gave the controlling interest in his shares to a Rothschild. So you talk about globalist connections, and yet Khodorkovsky, who was supported by Biden, I refer to him as Biden's oligarch, because literally Senate Resolution 322 is Joe Biden along with John McCain and Barack Obama supporting Mikhail Khodorkovsky. Nobody does a story at all. Now, when I started reporting on Russiagate, Charles, I quickly noticed Ukrainians showing up everywhere. I didn't know anything about Ukraine at the time. I've learned a thing or two about it. And one of the places I noticed this was that the #1 country that had donated to one of the Clinton charities was Ukraine through Viktor Pinchuk. And that struck me as weird. What do you know about Viktor Pinchuk, Charles?
Fair amount. So Viktor Pinchuk is married to the daughter. I think he's been married twice to politically connected people in Ukraine. And I think his current wife is the daughter of one of the former leaders of Ukraine. Somehow he's amassed a vast fortune. There are allegations that he has been trading with Iran and engaged in other dodgy schemes. He's an equal opportunity supporter of Republicans and Democrats alike. And he and his wife, Elena Franchuk, were very much involved with the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative starting in around 2004 and 5 in Ukraine at a time when that initiative was not a legitimate charity. After 2005, when the Franchuks continued to be involved with this thing, it certainly was not a legitimate charity. I believe it never actually got federal and state and foreign tax exemption. But nonetheless, large sums were sent towards this entity that in theory distributed HIV/AIDS, HIV medicines, antiretroviral drugs, but with very light supervision. No one really knows where these purported contributions went. There's never been an honest accounting of it. And I believe that Pinchuk also may have given money to either the Trump inauguration or some Trump entity as well.
Yes, he did. You're exactly right. Charles Altell, fantastic appearance. Jason, thanks for bringing Charles. Carmine, thanks for showing up and being great as usual. Thanks to all of our callers, Tarif, Ingrid, Jen, Brave, and Nick. We'll be back tomorrow on the best damn radio show in the world. Till then, I'm Lee Stranahan. This is The Backstory.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Good evening. Welcome to the Critical Hour. We're coming to you from the capital of the United States of America, Washington, D.C., here on Radio Sputnik. I'm your host, political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist, Dr. Wilmer Leon. I'm joined here by my co-host, political analyst, Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
For the next 2 hours, we will explore and analyze the salient news stories that are impacting the global village in which we live. RT has a story: Germany running out of natural gas. Natural gas reserves in Germany, which has one of the highest underground storage capacities in Europe, have fallen to historically low levels compared with previous years. This, while President Putin and German Chancellor Scholz are to deliberate over the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and the Ukrainian crisis. For insight into this, we turn to our first guest. He's an international geopolitical consultant, global speaker, author, veteran, former international security analyst in Washington, D.C., and founder of Global Perspective Consulting, headquartered in Dallas, Texas, Dr. David Oualaalou. As always, David, welcome back.
Pleasure to be with you guys.
So the occupancy rate or gas reserve is now around 35%